D.C.
We will follow the evidence wherever it leads and to whomever it leads. So I think once we're composed and we're getting close, we'll be defining the scope and the order and the priority of our witnesses. And I don't want to get ahead of the process.
Do you expect to have to issue subpoenas?
Yes, I do. We want to make sure, for example, when we request documents, that we get all of them, that we don't have people withholding information because it's a voluntary request. So, yes, I favor going to subpoenas and going to them early. And with witnesses, I expect that some of them will be reluctant to testify and they'll need to be compelled. So that's certainly my expectation.
Congressman Adam Schiff there, member of the January 6th Select Committee, further than hinting that the committee will not be afraid to pull out all the stops in order to get to the bottom of the Capitol insurrection. Fortunately for them, there's already a roadmap of sorts for their investigation, thanks to the detailed inside look at the Trump White House in the book I Alone Can Fix It, from the Washington Post, Phil Rucker and Carol Leonnig. In one scene, members of the White House counsel began to go over any possible avenues for an investigation by Congress into the insurrection. The afternoon of January 6th, it started dawning on the White House counsel and his deputies that Trump could conceivably be charged with a crime they write for setting off the deadly riot. Congress was sure to examine what had led to and allowed this violent breach of the Capitol, including the president's role in instigating it. Any good prosecutor would examine closely what the president, Donald Trump Jr., Rudy Giuliani, and others had said at the rally. Had they egged the mob on to the Capitol? If so, what was their intent? Joining us now, Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post reporters Carol Leonnig and Phil Rucker. They are the authors of the brand new book, I Alone Can Fix It, Donald Trump's Catastrophic Final Year. I got to talk to you guys last week from vacation about the book. I read it ahead of that, and I'm so excited to get to talk to you today, especially as the Select Committee starts its work. I was thinking that you could help them draw up a witness list, and I want to start with your White House reporting specifically. Should they subpoena the White House counsel, and what might he share?
Nicole,
Carol,
I think it's really...
first.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the idea of the witness list inside the White House. And Phil and I, after a lot of painstaking reporting, could provide a list. But I mean, that's not our job. People can read open source material and they can look and see exactly what we wrote about January 6th and the days and hours before. But in that group of people, it definitely includes Pat Cipollone, who was threatening to resign the evening of January 6th, along with his deputies. So perturbed was he and unsettled by the suggestion that was offered of a sort of a protective, prophylactic pardon for the president, his sons, Rudy Giuliani, and that concern that it would look like they were trying to obstruct justice by such a pardon. There are other people, though, too, Nicole, who know a lot about what was happening inside the White House that day and who know more about what Trump knew at the time and what he was doing, including watching television kind of gleefully to see his supporters charging up the steps and the hill of the Capitol Hill. Those people include Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and the president's own daughter, Ivanka Trump.
I thought of this idea of your book as one of their roadmaps. As Carol said, Phil, there's a lot of open source reporting, and so much of what happened on that day happened on TV. But I wonder, so much of the book centers around how General Milley functioned as a real bulwark inside the inside inner circle. Talk about that, especially leading up to January 6th and through January 20th.
Yeah, Nicole, General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is not somebody that we heard a lot about in our day-to-day reporting at the time. But when we went back and did this deeper excavation for this book, we learned that he played a really critical role in trying to prevent the president from doing dangerous, illegal, or unconstitutional things. And Milley, in those months between the November 3rd election and Joe Biden's January 20th inauguration, he saw his role not just as being the top military officer, but as being a bulwark protecting America's democracy, because he feared that Trump was going to use his power as commander-in-chief to order the military to help him stage some sort of a coup to stay in power, despite the will of the people, which, of course, was to elect Joe Biden as the next president. And it was a really harrowing period for Milley when he had to meet with the fellow Joint Chiefs, the heads of the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the other branches of the military, to try to game out what they would do if an order came down from the president that they thought was dangerous for the country or unconstitutional or illegal or unethical. And they were planning to resign one by one in sort of a reverse Saturday Night Massacre in order to prevent the president's order from being executed by the military. It's pretty extraordinary.
I mean, Phil, all of this goes to so much knowledge in advance of January 6th of Donald Trump's corrupt intent. I mean, you look at all of the sort of the criminal law education we all got watching the Mueller probe. I mean, Milley was going to resign. Cipollone was going to resign. There's some extraordinary reporting in the book about Bill Barr, who did walk away. They all knew he was going to do something catastrophic in that period between Election Day and the inauguration. Do you think they're worried about being subpoenaed by this select committee, Phil?
They certainly could be worried. And, you know, Milley is somebody, unlike the others, who is currently in government service. He has an obligation to speak to Congress when he's called. He testifies regularly about a range of topics before the Congress. And so he's in a slightly different position than some of these former officials who've left. But you're right. And it wasn't just Milley. It was Bill Barr, the Attorney General. Even Mark Meadows knew something could have been adrift. And of course, after January 6th, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, according to our reporting in the book, was just as concerned and would have these daily check-in calls with Milley and Meadows to see what was on the horizon, what sort of dangerous landmines were out there. And so certainly they could speak to the president's state of mind, to his intent, you know, whether there was actually a plan on the part of President Trump to do something illegal or criminal. We're not really sure, but you know, there were a lot of fears at the very highest levels of the government that something dangerous could happen.
I mean, Carol, your book points out at the very, very, very tippy top highest levels of the government, the vice president didn't trust the rest of the government on January 6th. Talk about what you report and why it has struck so many nerves.
Well, it definitely had the hairs on the back of our neck go up, Nicole, when Phil and I were learning the very specific details. You know, there are a lot of critics of Vice President Pence as being sort of this silent statue, never objecting, always nodding along with whatever slightly dangerous thing that the president next proposed. But on January 6th, the vice president was determined that he was going to certify the election. And I'll just tell you a few things that happened that day. He was evacuated rather rapidly once there was an alert put out to the Secret Service radios that protesters had breached the Capitol. They were breaking through glass on two sides of the building, and finally many dozens were inside. He was evacuated rapidly along with his wife, his daughter, his brother, and several of his aides to a hideaway office. Seconds before, actually, a group of rioters charged up to the landing where he had just crossed. His detail leader urged that he leave twice. "We have to get you out of here, sir. This is not safe. We have to evacuate the Capitol." Twice, Pence said no. The third time, the detail leader said, "I'm so sorry, sir, we are going." There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They evacuated, as we've all seen on television, down those back steps, that tape recording. They had armed agents in front of them to clear the path and make sure they didn't run into any trouble, since there were now thousands of rioters streaming into the building, calling for Pence's head and for his execution. When Pence got to the secure subterranean basement where his car was waiting, an armored limousine, his detail leader, Tim Giebel, said, "Let's get inside the car, sir." The vice president said, "No, I trust you, Tim, but you're not the guy driving the car. The other agents will, I know, drive away, and I'm not leaving this building." So essentially, multiple ways, Pence said, "I'm sticking right here."